Just wanted to thank you all and our panel for joining us today. This is one of the panels I've really been looking forward to, both as the product of American universities, as the parent of a college sophomore at an American university. I have many questions for our guests, but I think it's important before we get started to first acknowledge this is really sort of a powerhouse panel of American universities. Jamie Marasatis from the Lumina Foundation, with years of experience in funding research, grant-making, innovation in higher education more broadly. Liz Magill from the University of Pennsylvania, and Battinto from Arizona State University. It's really a range, and I'm looking forward to a wide-ranging conversation. But before we get started, I think it's important, since we are primarily going to be talking about the crisis in American universities, to set the stage a little bit. And here I'm going to rely on the reporting from one of my colleagues at the New York Times, Alan Blinder, part of our amazing team on higher education. So I'm just going to read to you a couple of statistics from one of Alan's recent stories about who is the American college student, because it was surprising to me and perhaps will be surprising to many of you that almost half of them, 43%, attend community colleges, which is not the elite institutions that are so often in the news. 20% of them are parents. 26% of them study exclusively online, not at the leafy college campuses, again, that we're so familiar with. And 1/3 of them are recipients of Pell Grants, which in the United States is the grants for the students with the greatest financial needs. So that is a very different picture from the elite institutions that are most frequently the targets of authoritarian crackdowns. So again, I know that is primarily our subject for this discussion, but I think it's really important for us to kind of define the terms and define what's actually going on in American universities before we sort of start talking about the way forward, the reasons for this crackdown, what we've learned, and what universities are doing. So, Jamie, I thought I'd start with you. I mean, essentially, universities have been put in the position of having to justify themselves. Like, they've been the target of so many attacks. They're on the defensive, trying to find a way forward. How do you think about that problem?
Yeah, let me start first with an added statistic to the ones that you cited from Alan's recent piece, which is that less than 1 out of every 5 Americans attends a college or university that admits less than half of the students who apply. So the vast majority of students who go to higher education in the United States apply and are admitted. They are what we would call open access institutions. And those institutions serve today's students, what you were describing. Those are the students who we primarily are interested in at Lumina Foundation, because we're focused on increasing high-quality post-secondary educational attainment, credentials of value, which we can talk about, but ensuring that people both get more higher education and better higher education over time. And I think these attacks that you're talking about, these sort of frontal assaults on the enterprise of higher education, starting with the elites, is unlikely to be contained to the elites for very long. I do think that this idea of controlling what's happening, because higher ed institutions are independent entities, I think is an important part of the authoritarian playbook, the anti-democratic strategies at work. And my view of higher education is that, if we sort of think about this global wave, this storm of anti-democratic forces that are building, higher education is really an umbrella in that storm. It's an umbrella both long-term and short-term. And let me start with the short-term. In the short term, we can think about higher education as providing people with the tools to sort misinformation from real information. it gives people work skills that allow them to have secure and stable lives and earn family-sustaining wages and be able to participate in their communities, in their civic institutions. So in the near term, there's really important benefits of higher education, irrespective of whether it's an elite or a public access four-year institution or a community college. But in the long term, I think higher education is equally important as that umbrella, because I think it provides us with the capacity to be critical thinkers, to actually solve shared problems, and to contribute to each other's well-being. And I think that's the area that we're now facing, which is that these attacks on higher ed could actually reduce both the number of people attending, it could reduce the effectiveness of those institutions, and it could lead to a diminishment of the capacity of American society to advance. A really good example of that, back to the elites for a second, is that the attack on the research enterprise, which is where a lot of the sort of leverage is being taken at this point. The funding will really come at the expense of American innovation, right? And so Michael Crow, who Battinto reports to, likes to say that, if you look at the iPhone, there are thousands of patents that were used to create the iPhone that were developed at university campuses because of university research that wouldn't be possible without the iPhone. So for those reasons, I think innovation in the American context and broadly will suffer because of these attacks.
Okay, so we're going to come back to the question of who's defending the umbrella, how you do that. So, Battinto, I want to go to you first, and Liz, I will soon have questions for you. But you may not have been quite at the center in the way that Liz was of some of these attacks, but I know you're feeling the effects, and I know you have thoughts about the way forward, like how you, as an institution, maintain control, show your value, strengthen your ties to the community when those ties are under attack. Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching it?
Sure. I mean, well, first I'm going to make a note and say that when we think about elite, I think that we're pretty elite at ASU as well. I mean, it's for 10 years plus, we've been number one in innovation. And so, but to your question, for us, we're looking at this as an opportunity to chart a path forward, to be, leaders in this, and really truly live out what our charter means at ASU, which is about really inclusive excellence, and that we don't measure ourselves by whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how we succeed. And then the other part of our charter gets into taking fundamental responsibility for the communities that we serve. And so we truly believe in that. And so what that means in this particular time is, I would say 3 A's for us. So number one would be access. We've got to continue to provide access to as many people as possible who want an education. And then the second A would be adaptability. We have to adapt how we offer education and begin to think even more beyond the traditional bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, and that we have to think about other ways of training people, credentials, certificate programs, to really meet people where they are. To some of the statistics that you quoted, those are people who are working, may not have time to take off to pursue a degree, but still need skills. How do we meet them where they are? And then accountability. Our research that we are conducting, very, very valuable research, but what does it mean to the public? How do we communicate to the public the value of the research that we're conducting and what it means to them, and then how they can utilize it? And so we can't put walls around ourselves and say we're the university, that this is some, elite thing that only a few can access. No, we serve the public, and how do we do this even more? And so we see this time that we're in now as a true gut check regarding the values that we espouse. How do we truly live it out?
So I'm assuming that most of those things you described, ASU has been doing for a long time. So what changed after these recent attacks? Like, what are you doing differently? Like, is there pressure that you're feeling now that you weren't before? Has the attitude of the community changed? Like, how are you responding?
Well, we really certainly feel like we're on the front lines of it. I mean, you referenced our leader who is a Navy brat, and what he described is to us, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and he described, sort of using a sailing term that we're sailing, and when you sail, you have to tack to your sail to where the winds are blowing, and that our goal may be to get here, but the wind is blowing here. We're going to go where the wind is taking us and still work to get where we ultimately want to be. So it means, adapting to what the current conditions are. It means, being in consistent conversation, as he's indicated with the administration, talking about our values and who we are as an institution, and that we're not just seeking to change now, but this is who we've always been. And then, again, as I said, engaging the public in terms of what our value to them is. And so this is not some sea change for us. It's really more about communicating what we've been doing all along and why we are here, and that we are a university of the people, truly.
Right. And so when you say the administration, meaning like you're in discussions with the Trump administration.
Yes.
And you found them to be receptive?
Well, I'm not going to speak for President Crow in terms of the conversations that he's had, but I would say that we want to be as visible as possible in terms of what that looks like in communicating what we do.
Okay, all right. And I'm sure some in our audience might have more questions about that to the extent you can answer, but let me go to Liz first. Like Liz, for those of you who may not have been following that news, you were right in the middle of the storm at a certain point, like pretty early on. University of Pennsylvania, I think, became a symbol in many ways for elite institutions, in the same way that right now Harvard is kind of in the crosshairs for sure. You've gone through that. You're still a professor at the university. You're engaged. I'm sure you've had some time to reflect on everything that happened. What would you say has changed about your understanding about that fight and what it says about the university going forward?
There's a lot to say about
Yeah.
that. I'm just trying to think through a little bit, because in some ways, the fight continued and has continued into the new administration.
Yeah.
The fall of 23 and the outbreak of the war in Gaza predated the election of the president, who I would say has carried the torch of much of what occurred with Congress's expressed concern and hearings, calling
That's
in
right.
higher ed leaders in the year before, 4 or 5 hearings, threats of subpoenas, things like that, most of which were aimed at focusing on insufficient response to anti-Semitism on campus, and a wide range of other issues. If you watch those hearings, the woke university, broadly described, that means lots of different things to different people. The pursuit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, declining standards of excellence, teaching things that don't matter, a whole range of concerns that we have seen in the Trump administration have been brought to bear in quite different ways, in threats to withhold
That's right.
research
That's right.
funding. And so I don't think the story is quite over. In fact, I think it's sort of continuous from that fall of 23 into the new presidency.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that what started as a discussion about how are universities dealing with anti-Semitism has basically continued and evolved into defend the purpose of the university, defend why you exist, the value that you bring to American society. And that seems to be the fight that many institutions are engaged in. Does that sound
I agree,
about right?
but with a level of operationalization that is grabbing at the levers that the federal government has to use against the universities. So it's your funding will be cut, you have violated anti-discrimination laws, and therefore you need to do the following 17 things. We may take away your accreditation as a university. We may revoke your tax-exempt status. We may, the most recent news from Harvard is we may debar you from any federal grants in the future based on your violation of the anti-discrimination laws. So absolutely defend yourself, but here are the arrows that we have in our quiver, and they are very many. And if you look, more broadly, we've had allegedly the administration requiring the resignation of a president before they'll continue to negotiate with the university. We have the administration concerned about the president of another university in the state of Virginia where I live. So there's a whole range of tools that the administration is using to advance this broader objective of a critique, an attack, a profound concern about what higher education institutions are doing. So it's the tools they're using are very powerful.
And the breaking news from this morning, from a few hours ago, which is these 9 institutions receiving letters from the Trump administration demanding that they do a variety of things like keep their tuitions flat for 5 years and only use 2 genders in the transmission of any information that they have. It's a sort of panoply of things that's designed to put the universities in a very difficult position of not signing it, but in effect creating a federal imprint on literally everything that happens at the university.
And John, can I say one more thing? I mean, we have focused understandably on the federal level, what is happening at the state level in state universities with legislatures passing laws about what can and can't be taught and how it can and can't be taught, the stripping of tenure. There's a whole range of other things that have been happening before this administration came into office. So it's a state and federal.
Yeah. So, you've all sort of mentioned the range of tools that sort of arrayed against you, the different kinds of leverage, legislative, legal, financial leverage. Now, what I have observed from, many universities, the discussion, the defense, the strategy is primarily around proving economic value. It's largely in economic terms. We provide this number of jobs, we create innovation, we train talent, our degrees are valuable for individual students. Do you think that is a sufficient conversation? Is it effective? Is that the conversation that universities want to be having? I'd love to just hear from all of you how you think about that.
How you define value, I think, is the key. We've been through these different eras in America, and they are not dissimilar to what we've seen in other parts of the world, which is we had a long era of improving access to higher education for as many groups and people as possible. We've been through a more recent era where we said that both access and the completion of the credentials, the attainment of the credentials, was really important. And now we're in this new era of saying, look, these credentials must demonstrate value. And we certainly are, at Lumina Foundation, in favor, generically, in this conversation about value. But value is a term that is challenging to define given current data systems. So it's easy to define value in economic terms, wage differentials, whether or not you have a job, what the quality of the job is, et cetera. The question is, what are the other things that matter? And I would argue that value ultimately has to be defined both in preparing people for purposeful lives, meaning that you've actually got to prepare people to be engaged, actively involved in what they're doing in their communities. They actually need to have meaning and purpose in what they're doing. I wrote a book a few years ago called Human Work in the Age of Smart Machines. And one of the pieces of research that I found in doing the research for that book is that even the lowest wage American workers are willing to give up money if they believe their job is doing something useful. Money for meaning is a real thing among American workers, even the lowest wage workers. So people want to get an education, not just to make money, but they want to lead purposeful lives, and they want to be active in their sort of citizen obligations, not just voting, but actually participating in those institutions in a way that allows them to develop their skills in sort of understanding history, being able to contribute more broadly to what's happening to the rapidly changing world that they live in. So value's got to be defined ultimately in those terms, even though, frustratingly, in the near term, the best way to describe it is primarily wages. And so I think that the value conversation could turn out to be a good thing if higher education responds to the challenge, delivers both on the economic and the social, the public and the private benefits in a way that really matters to individuals and therefore to shared well-being.
Mm-hmm. So, Battinto, yeah, how do you answer? How do you?
Well, I mean, as you were speaking, I mean, I feel like I'm in the batter's box just waiting for this because it's really a great opportunity to show the importance of journalism and to bringing people together and informing people and so that we can come together for a problem-solving role to serve our communities. And so I would say if you think of the things where we need to show value to people, is the value of education and journalism and media skills, that in the thinking about media literacy and how we combat mis and disinformation, because those are some of the key things that are keeping us from being able to come together to find common ground. We have to find common ground in our communities and show that we may be at different ends of the spectrum politically, but there are things that we value that are important to us, and how do we solve those problems together, regardless of what we do when we get in the voting box. And so I would say, as we think about the path forward for higher education, say stressing the importance of journalism and media skills, I really think should be at the forefront of that and at the tip of the spear.
And is that working in Arizona? I mean, Arizona is not insulated from national politics. Like it's divided politically in the same way that many communities are, many states are. Like, how is it actually playing out?
Well, I would, something I say quite often is that we have the best laboratory for studying the effectiveness of journalism and communication skills because of Arizona and all of the politics that are on the ground there. And so, our students get a front row seat to all of those things in our teaching hospital. So if you ask me how well it's going, I would say, it's playing out. It remains to be seen, but we're still practicing, we're still moving forward. Our school is strong, our enrollment is strong. We have students who come to us from across the country. And every chance I get to talk with students, I ask them where they're from. And then, they tell me, and I say, wow, you skipped over a lot of other really great schools to come to, ASU and to come to Cronkite. And they said that what really drew them is really, in part, was being in Arizona and all of the opportunities that represented. And so we don't take that lightly because we know that a lot of eyes are on us, is that how do we lead from that? And that how do we take what we are doing well and share it with others? And so that's a responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So Liz, how do you answer the sort of the value question, the value?
Well, I agree with, I agree and appreciate both my co-panelists. I would say that Jamie's point that there are many different ways of describing value. The easiest has to do with the job and the wage. It's very measurable. A meaningful life, as perhaps all of us who've lived can attest, is not an easy thing to define and changes for humans over time. So I completely agree with that. I think it's both a true and a smart argument to be making, especially to those who are elected officials and who are making some really important decisions about higher education for the public institutions in their states and also in Congress, if they are going to push back or not against any of the things the administration is doing, that value, that the jobs that are created in communities, as well as the prospects that people have when they graduate. I think it's a smart argument. I don't know that that argument is going to change this current administration's perspective on higher education. But to me, that doesn't it is both smart and true as an argument about the consequences of higher education. I think there are a lot of others. Jamie touched on the innovation, and I just would say more generally the advance of knowledge and universities as repositories of human knowledge, that if we put them up to a market test, we wouldn't be preserving any of that. There are a whole range of other things, and the focus of this conference is in part about, what's happening with democracy.
Yeah.
And if we want something that many leaders do not want, which is independent sources of knowledge, opinion, and educated citizens who are taught to think critically and be skeptical, not having universities would be a huge problem,
Right.
a dramatic change in colleges and universities in this country long term. So I guess I would encourage us, those who want to point out the benefits of universities, think about both the short term and the long term. I think this economic effect argument is a powerful one for the short term.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to change this administration's view.
Right. So that's I think that's kind of the heart of the problem, right?
Yes.
Are the tools that universities are using right now, the measures to sort of show their value, are they sufficient to meet that long-term challenge? I mean, if you can't talk to this administration or any really populist movement about the value of an elite education, who is the constituency for that? Who can you talk to establish for the long term that no, this has real value for democracy, that not just, is it perhaps your students, their parents, the larger community? Who do you talk to kind of play that long game?
Well, one thing I'll say is 2/3 of students who get a bachelor's degree in the United States are educated at public institutions, and Jamie gave the figure about how many of them are essentially open enrollment institutions. So I think the part of the conversation has to be that I loved Alan's piece as well. The national conversation in the United States tends to be about 7 or 8 schools that are not representative in any way, and that the sector is much richer and more interesting and more diverse than we tend to talk about when we read a front page story on the Washington Post or New York Times. So I think the case shouldn't be about the elites, as it were. If you just focus on the universities that perform a lot of research and put it out into the world, there are hundreds of those. They wouldn't be on the elite list. And then, of course, education is happening across almost 4,000 institutions in the United States, if you count 2-year, 4-year, public, private. And so I think that's part of the case that has to be made over the longer term, and what those institutions do for the broader society in both education and research that they do. That's one point.
Yeah.
So, I think that we just have to be honest with ourselves that we're faced with a reckoning. And, like it or not, elections have consequences. And that the people who voted for this administration, unless I'm missing something, I don't see a groundswell of people coming to our defense. So obviously the administration is representing a sentiment. And so we can choose to ignore that, or we can choose to learn something from it and adapt to it. I think that the conversation that we should be having is not so much about fighting this administration, but about thinking about the long game here, and that what are we learning from this reckoning that we're being confronted with, and how do we engage in a different way and in a broader way going forward.
There's two sides to this, so just to follow your point, Battinto. I think there's two sides to this issue of what does the public want. So again, we're talking mostly here in the American context, but you see this in other parts of the world. So we've done research now for many years with Gallup on confidence in higher education in the American context. And in 2015, 60% of Americans said they had a great deal or quite a bit of confidence in the American higher education system. From 2015 to 2024, that percentage dropped every single year. Went from 60% to 36%. Last year, it went up a little bit to 42% for the first time in that trend line. And our theory is that it's primarily because there has been so much conversation about what's wrong with higher ed that there was a group of people who sort of shifted and said, yeah, but. So let's talk about the yeah, but. What is it that people say they want from higher education? Well, and this is where the critique, I think, and to the points that both of you have been making are really important. They want a system that's affordable. The American system of higher education is the most expensive system in the world by far. Yes. You all know this, no matter what country you live in. We have a very good higher education system, but the price that consumers pay for it is extraordinarily high compared to anywhere else in the world. So affordability is a long-term trend. If you're under the age of 40 and you're sitting in this room right now, you've never seen a world where the average tuition rate at an American institution increased at less than twice the rate of inflation. 40 years. So it's a long-term trend that is a problem. The public's also concerned about preparation for jobs. That's a serious concern. But the public's also concerned about these questions of meaning and purpose and dignity and all those other things that I think, again, are harder to measure, harder to understand. But irrespective of political party, this is an interesting thing that we found in the data, is that very high percentages of Americans say that being prepared to be an active participant in the democracy is an important goal of what you should get out of your higher education experience. And I think that's something for higher education to sort of process and understand and build on as we think about this new system that both needs to meet the needs of those individuals, but needs to meet the needs of society.
Mm-hmm. So can I camp on quickly
yes,
to that?
Go ahead.
I think this, exactly what Jamie said, is why I said arguments about the economic effect are not going to change this administration's argument. And I think we have to focus on the long-term changes that are definitely needed in higher ed that these polls indicate. Declining trust is about, overwhelmingly, if I'm remembering the figures right, Jamie, about the cost of higher education and access to higher education and relevance, of course. Those are things I think any person worth their salt who's in higher education has been worrying about and thinking about since this data came out. And I think trying to defend against the immediate attacks with this argument or that argument, I don't think they're going to change them, which is why higher ed needs to be self-reflecting on the things that they know and agree. I mean, no one agrees on anything in higher education, as you know. Ask 3 professors, you get 15 opinions. But that are kind of clearly things we need to change. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think of that as defense. I think of that as what you're describing as adapting. Yeah. This is an opportunity, I suppose, because we're so under threat. But the last thing I'll say is all of these things that the administration is doing, there is only one university that has been willing to sue to argue that what the administration is doing to that university violates a whole bunch of different laws. And they won in court. They may win the battle and lose the war. So it's
you're referring to Harvard.
Harvard. I mean, universities challenged the change in indirect cost funding for federal grants. But to me, that is an indication that we actually can't effectively, given how hard it is to coordinate together, come up with an immediate strategy that is going to make the decisive argument because of the levers that the administration has.
So I want to throw out for all of you, again, a sort of provocative idea that really came out of our discussion yesterday. Liz, you and I were talking about the possibility that if one sort of takes a step back from this fight and asks the question, well, why is it that universities, particularly elite universities, became such a target, and why they have proved to be, frankly, a fairly effective target for this administration from what we can see. It's that the populist movement correctly recognize that universities, many of them, have become sort of one of the last remaining public forums. Like, it is the public square. In many communities, the university campus is the place where people meet other people from different backgrounds. It's the place where ideas are contested. It's the place where people are challenged. It's the place where young people are. It's the place where things happen. So, I mean, what does that tell you? Do you think that's a fair reading of what's going on, that perhaps the populist movement recognized that value and that's why they're fighting there?
Well, I think the populist movement has understood that the best way to sort of create support for your cause, in this case the right-wing populism, is to go after institutions that are supporting the issues that are against what your beliefs are. And so higher education is easy to caricature as elite, and that elite characterization, which, as we said earlier, is not really true for much of American higher education. Most of it is not elite. It's really it is very democratic in that sense, in its nature. But the elites really do exist at a sort of level, given the hierarchy of the American system, at the top of the food chain, and the perspective, and this is true, many institutions aspire to be more like the elites. That is one of their goals. And that is a built-in, I think, feature of the system that's got to change. That understanding that our primary purposes are democratic purposes, not simply to create fewer opportunities for people to get in the door, to create fewer, ways in which people can gain the rare privilege of going to X institution. That is an important part, I think, of the reform movement that we've got to figure out here, which is how to literally help the higher ed system serve more people better. And one thing I just want to add in here, which is going to be important to all of this, which is that academic freedom is a very important part of this entire enterprise here, right? That if, pardon me for sort of torturing my own metaphor now, but if higher education is the umbrella, academic freedom is the raincoat that you wear and you have the umbrella, because academic freedom is how you most closely protect the people who are actually delivering the higher education. Academic freedom provides the context for people to have honest and open dialogue and debate on campus. It gives people the tools to be able to, have free inquiry and explore paths that might be unpopular and not have to implement a government-implemented curriculum without fear of retribution. That is a very different conversation, as Rob Quinn said yesterday in the NGO session from Scholars at Risk, than the conversations about freedom of speech. Free speech is extremely important, but free speech is essentially not fearing retribution from government because of what you've said. Mm-hmm. Academic freedom provides the context for this new knowledge development. It provides the context for this idea that we can get to a better place and therefore transmit the knowledge that's developed in higher education because of the freedom that the people who are in these institutions have to do that inquiry.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with everything Jamie said as well. I'm going to sort of go back to your question because I do think it's an interesting idea. When we spoke yesterday, I was talking about how of the many things that universities are not quite ready for, one of them is that the campus is a fantastic place to have an ideological or political argument. If you are a national organization, you just get one student to invite your organization to that campus. It's a campus of 18 to 25-year-olds. If it's a residential campus that have, some time on their hands and are interested, they walk by, they have a conversation with you. You're going to, you can provoke some angry students yelling at you if you're saying something really provocative. And I would say a change in higher education in the last 20 to 25 years is that national organizations are actually quite organized in using campuses in this way. Labor, immigration would be two very good examples of we've got labor organizers, immigration organizers on both sides or all sides of the issue coming to campus to make their broader point that they want the wider society to know about and using the campus. And there are many ways in which campuses have always had protest. Leaders have hated egghead college professors for a really long time. Henry VIII went after the monasteries. This is an old story, but the fact that the colleges are in the public square, with national organizations participating, I think is a quite new and different thing. And I think it could be a reason they're even more of a target, more lampooning of them, because 20-year-olds do behave badly often. I don't know, but your 20-year-old, mine does. So they reliably behave in ways that might go viral. I used to say when I was president of Penn, there are 50,000 employees and 25,000 students there, and any given day you could find something that might go viral happening on the campus. So if you're looking, you'll find something. So they're a great location to have a broader argument, ideological, political, whatever it is. And universities are not ready for that. I think it could be they're not fully ready for that. It could be a reason, an enhanced reason for the targeting, but you could also turn it into one of the best things about universities, which is part of what Jamie was saying.
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah.
so.
I wanted to go back to what Jamie was saying. We talked about academic freedom, and it's important. But I would say that it's also with that freedom that we have comes responsibility. And that would we ever think about then, okay, because we have this academic freedom and this ability to research what we want to research and write about what we write about, but then where's the public value in it? And then would we ever allow the public to guide what it is that we actually research and what we publish? And if the question is no, then why not? Because if we are fighting for this freedom, then who does that freedom serve? Does it serve our interest as academics, or does it serve the public's interest? And I would say that if not, then that's part of the problem.
Okay, so I know that alone is a provocative idea for many academics who feel that like academic freedom is just like an absolute red line. But I'm thankful to you for bringing that into our discussion. And with that, I want to open it up to our audience. I know there are some young people here who may have some questions. We have time for a couple of. Go ahead. Not enough time even for one question? Okay, one question.
Right,
Go ahead.
There's the student.
Hi, I'm Cash. I'm from the United States. I'm from Pennsylvania, but I go to school. I'm a senior at Oberlin College. And I know this whole conversation centered around the trajectory of education and higher education in the United States. But I wanted to ask, this is anybody on the panel, what's one piece of optimism that you have about the trajectory of higher education in the United States? Because we feel bogged down, but I know there's definitely some light in the darkness.
Okay.
I'm encouraged actually by the disruption that we're in, because I believe that people disrupt things because they care, they want to see something better, and that there's some energy around it and how we respond. So I'm actually hopeful. That makes me excited for what will be as the end result and how we adapt.
Okay, that's a great answer. Do you
I
want to
was just
reply?
gonna say, if you don't read the headlines and think about how many people in the United States want some form of higher education, a two-year college, a four-year college, and or more, the demand and desire for that far outstrips what we're capable of offering, and definitely what we're capable of offering at an affordable price right now. So I don't think the individual's desire to educate themselves, I don't think that's diminished at all. So I think we should remember that.
Okay.
I'm extremely optimistic about, because you stood up, I'm going to say this, about a much more active engagement of students in the moment in this reform effort. And that is something really, really important at this time. We've seen this in other parts of the world. I've worked globally in higher education, lots of different contexts. And it has been since the 60s, since we've seen the kind of engagement that we've seen in the US of students and student leaders rising, talking about what is important to them and why it matters. And so I'm very optimistic in that sense about students participating and driving some of the reforms that are needed.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience.